I think that we should be more or less streaming on our YouTube channel. As always, be patient with us. We are, now starting in a moment. If anyone is watching, my name
We
is.
are.
We are live streaming. So very good. Welcome. My name is Marco Armiero, and you are on the Resistance, a Journal of Radical Environmental Humanities YouTube channel. And we will start our lecture with John Holloway just in a few minutes, just the time that other people will join us. Okay, so be patient, and in a few minutes we will start. Maybe Nuno, can you tell me if there are already people uh, joining us? Some. I can
For
also.
now, three they're increasing.
Okay. I if I open mine, I think that I will have a problem with the. Let's see with the audio. But I think that yes, please.
It's right now. No, it's just the four people watching, but the number will go up.
Okay.
Four
Welcome.
people
Five,
more or
six.
just us?
Sorry.
Four people in addition to us, or we're the four people?
No, 4 people in addition to us.
All
Wow.
right.
But
But it's coming up. It's growing.
so welcome all of you that are joining. My name is Mark Carmiero, and as I said before earlier, we are waiting just 3 more minutes. So at 5 past we will start as always with our lecture, but we are giving a little bit of time for people to join. So be patient. In 3 minutes we will start. And I am looking that if everything is okay on our channel. Okay, for those who are joining us, welcome. We are just waiting a couple of more minutes before we start. And you are on the Resistance, a Journal of Radical Environmental Humanities YouTube channel with John Holloway, our guest, and we will start in 2 minutes now. So welcome. I see that more people are joining. Uh, my name is Marco Armiero. We'll start in a few minutes, actually in 1 minute. We are just waiting for more people to join, but thank you for joining us so far. I see that the numbers are growing, and thank you very much for joining us here on the Resistance, a Journal of Radical Environmental Humanities YouTube channel. We will start in 1 minute our lecture with John Holloway. So be patient, and we are waiting for the others to join. Okay, I think that now we can we can be very Swedish, very precise on time. Let's start as we said, 5 past, and if more people will join, we will Lizzie, Nuno, and myself. We will take more or less 6 minutes for introduction, so we have a little bit more time for people to join. But welcome everyone for joining us today for this lecture. Okay, so a very well welcome to this second lecture in our Radical Environmental Humanities series. Today, we have Professor John Holloway. My name is Marco Armiero, and I am the editor-in-chief of Resistance, a journal of Radical Environmental Humanities. I am coordinating this lecture today with Lizzie Privitera from the University of Toronto and Nuno Marquez from KDH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. This lecture series is co-hosted by Resistance, by this journal, and the Institute for the History of Science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona in Spain. In a moment, Lizzie will introduce our guest speaker today, and Nuno will say a few words about the lecture series. And I will take a moment to introduce our journal. But first, I want to thank John Holloway and all our speakers for generously accepting our invitation. And you can find the entire program online on our website, on the Resistance website. Resistance is a relatively new journal, we can say almost newish journal. Previously titled Resilience, I changed its name when I became editor-in-chief to reflect a new intellectual and political agenda. While resilience focuses on enduring stresses and returning to a prior state, resistance is about fighting back and changing the conditions that causes the crisis. Our aim as a journal, as a collective, is to become a reference point for radical scholarship in the environmental humanities. If you are wondering what is radical in the environmental humanities, well, here is our working definition. I am quoting from our website. We say that radical environmental humanities include any approach that questions the current state of society and academia, stands, yes, I am supposed to finish, but just a couple of minutes, no, a couple of seconds, I think. I was saying radical environmental humanities include any approach that questions the current state of society and academia, stands in solidarity with grassroots movements and oppressed subjects, and contributes to research fostering more just socio-ecological relationships. However, today I would like to use John's own words in Change the World Without Taking Power. Praising the power of the scream of rebellion, John writes, and I'm quoting from him, "The more we study society, the more our negativity is dissipated or sidelined as being irrelevant. There is no room for the scream in academic discourse. More than that, academic study provides us with a language and a way of thinking that makes it very difficult for us to express our scream. The scream, from being the subject of our questions about society, becomes the object of analysis," end quote. But more than a definition, for us, radicality is a starting point for a collective quest. This lecture series is part of our shared research journey. And I stop here, sorry, I take a little bit more time, and I give the floor to Nuno.
Yes, thank you, Marco. Hello, everyone. My name is Nuno Marques. I'm a member of the collective at Resistance. Just here to introduce the lecture series, and I will also help moderating the Q&A. So this lecture is the second in a series of Radical Environmental Humanities that is taking place once a month from September 2024 to June 2025. Resistance will bring together a community of radical scholars to share ideas, stories, and dreams for the world we so desperately need. With this lecture series, we aim to contribute to the collective quest to reinvent and reenact radical environmental humanities. We are happy to have such incredible speakers in this series, and we invite you to their coming lectures. They are, and apologies for my mispronunciation, Dina Gilio Whitaker on November 19, Giovanna Di Ciro on December 19, Malcolm Ferdinand on January 21st, Nidvedita Menon on February 11, Eric Swingedo on March 18, Mimo Basse on April 10, Stefania Barca on May 20, and Raul Zibecki on June 25. Like Marcus said, you can find the lecture program with detailed information in the Facebook page of the Resistance Journal and at the webpage of the Institute for the History of Science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Thank you. And now I give the floor to Lizzie.
Thank you, Nuno. Thank you, Marco. Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Brivitera. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Toronto, and I am a member of the collective at Resistance Journal. I am here to introduce today's speaker, Professor John Holloway, and help moderate the Q&A. So Professor John Holloway is an eminent lawyer, sociologist, and philosopher who has inspired generations of scholars and activists, and I'm very glad and honored to introduce him today. During the 1970s, he played a key role in the Socialist Economists Conference, advocating for an understanding of the state as a social entity shaped by the ongoing class struggle between capital and the working class. Since 1991, he has resided in Mexico, where his work has become closely intertwined with the work of the Zapatista movement. Among his notable publications, we can mention the trilogy Change the World Without Taking Power, Crack Capitalism, and Hope in Hopeless Times, all of which have been translated into more than 10 languages across the world. Professor Holloway is currently a professor at the Institute for Humanities and Social Science at the Autonomous University of Puebla. And today, he will talk about the conflict between money and life, a truth that many of us actually, I think, recognize, yet at the same time feel is ridiculous and impossible. How do we grapple with this impossible truth, right? So today's lecture will certainly delve into these tricky questions, and we look forward to his insights. Before we begin, let me briefly explain how to submit your comments and questions. You can do so on our YouTube channel during the talk or at the end of the talk. Nuno, Marco, and I will share your questions during the Q&A session. In case you encounter any type of issue with sharing your questions and comment on YouTube, please feel free to reach out to us either on the Facebook page or in the Instagram page and of Resistance, or email us. Thank you again for your attention, and John, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lizzie. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Nuno. Yeah, terrific. Lovely to be here. Really a pleasure to be in this series. Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to talk about, the title of my talk is Life Against Money. I'm probably going to talk, I would think, for about 40 minutes or so, but really I'm extremely bad at calculating how much I'm going to talk, so I may go on for about 2 or 3 hours. No, but I hope not. The other thing is I'm in Mexico City at the moment. I'm not sure how good my connection is, so if my voice disappears, it would be good if you can tell me. Yeah. Okay. So basically, I've got a written text, which I'm going to go through. There are 8 points. Firstly, the first point is really the first point is about the title. The title comes from one of the Zapatista communiqués that they issued when they announced their crazy, insane, wonderful plan to visit Europe during the pandemic. And one thing they said there, and really is central, that they called their trip the trip for life. No? And one thing they say there, which is very important, they speak of, and I quote, the present confrontation in all the world, money versus life. And in this conflict, in this war, no honest person should be neutral with money or with life. And in a way, that sounds obvious, and in a way, that sounds crazy, I think, because it's easy to recognize some sort of truth there, that money clashes with life, clashes with the future of life. But at the same time, we think it's ridiculous. How can you possibly? I'm taking it in the strong sense of, basically, I think they're suggesting that the continuation of human life is incompatible with the existence of money. And this is just mad. It's mad because how can we possibly think of getting rid of money? No. So we think it's true, we think it's impossible, and the result is we think this is mad. In a way, I suppose something that preoccupies me more and more is the question of madness. No? If we want to go on talking and thinking beyond capitalism, if we want to say, well, capitalism is a disaster, but we have to think in some way of going beyond capitalism, to say that in a situation where there's no revolutionary party, there's no obvious revolution happening, then we are moving into a world or a form of reasoning that borders on madness. That borders on madness, but at the same time is absolutely crucial to the future of humanity. So, yeah, my question is, how do we go? Is there some way in which we can think through this madness? No. And that brings me to my second point. I said there were 8 points. The second point then is money against life. And the strange thing about money is that it is so present in our lives that we do not even see it. It is a kind of second nature, a social construction that we take for granted, like the air we breathe. It is the very center of power in society. And yet, if you look at the sociological or theoretical discussions of power, they don't talk about money. It's key to the way that people relate to one another. We relate to one another through money. But that is not at the center of sociology or social sciences. It is the greatest taboo, it seems to me, in this society, much, much more than sex, for example, which isn't really taboo anymore, but money is. No? So we can study the details of financial movements, but the notion of a society without money is ridiculous. So I feel that money, it's kind of there all the time. It's silent, it's unquestioned, and it colors the world with a gray that we do not even perceive because we know no other. In other words, we live in a gray world, made gray, especially by money. But that fog, that grayness, is something we don't perceive because we've never seen a world beyond money. And it shapes, money shapes the grammar of our thought and of our speech and of our action, just as surely as the blinkers that are put on the horse's eyes to make it go straight, to make sure that it does not get distracted by the world around it. And to stay with horses, I think that money, the power of money, is that it is, in reality, the harness of social activity, the harness, this thing that we put on horses to make them go in the direction that we want to, or especially if we've got, say, 2 horses and we want them to pull a plough up and down the field, then we put on a harness or a yoke. And I think in any society, we can think of it as a pattern of social cohesion or social confluence, the flowing together of human activities. Human activities are socialized, they're brought into contact, into conjunction with one another. And in capitalism, this confluence or this conjunction of human activities is brought about predominantly through commodity exchange, and this commodity cohesion confluence generates and is facilitated through money. So it is above all through money that our activities are linked to one another. And this, what we have to recognize, I think we can say, oh, money is horrible. But before saying that, I think we should say, but money is an extremely, or has proved to be an extremely effective harness of social activity, an extremely effective way of bringing social activities together. As Ferguson puts it in a book of a few years ago, money is the root of most progress. The ascent of money has been essential to the ascent of man. Financial innovation has been an indispensable factor in man's advance from wretched subsistence to the giddy heights of material prosperity that so many people have today. Or as Marx and Engels put it in the Communist Manifesto, the rule of money, or the rule of the people who own money, the bourgeoisie, has, and I quote, has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. And if that was already clear in Marx and Engels' time in 1848, then that is even more so if we think of what we're doing at the moment, if we think of this communication through the internet, through Zoom, through through the computer that I use every day, that this money created money, this human activity harnessed by money has been extremely effective. But we know as well, of course, we know that there's a problem. And there's a problem with the harness, with the way that the harness works. Because if we think again of a horse or a couple of horses, we put on a harness or a yoke to impose a certain direction on their movements. 2 horses are harnessed together to pull a plough, for example, and this directs their movements up and down, up and down, up and down the field in a way that is very effective for the purpose of cultivating crops, but is very far removed from the activity that the horses would be undertaking if they weren't harnessed. And in money, we have a harness that imposes a direction on human activity in much the same way. It converts activity into labor, or abstract labor, or alienated labor, as Marx called us. In other words, a labor, an activity that we do not control. So human activities are bound together in a certain way, determined not by the people who are acting, but by the impersonal sociality of the money binding. This impersonal sociality, which is the rule of money, is driven not by any conscious decision, certainly not by the conscious decision of the workers, not even by the conscious decision of the capitalists, but by the dynamic of its own self-expansion. In other words, the way in which money moves, the way in which money binds our activities together, is driven by the pursuit of profit. So we get enormous progress, certainly, achieved by the money harnessing of social activity. But it's not a neutral progress. It's a progress determined by the pursuit of money, which creates two very big problems. The first is what it does to human activity. It forces our activity into labor. And not just activity for a few minutes. It forces, it channels the activity of our lives, of our whole lives, into labor, into an activity that is determined by the pursuit of profit and not by what we would like to do. And then the product of our activity is, of course, appropriated in the service of profit, or in other words, money progress. The rule of money over social progress is based on exploitation. But I think there's something else. There is a second side to this money progress that we are becoming more and more aware of in recent years. And of course, this has to do with the journal Resistance and the whole idea of radical environmentalism, is that it has become more and more clear that the way in which money shapes human activity, or the way in which capital, which profit shapes human activity, is enormously destructive. Again, to go back to Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, they say the cheap prices of its commodities, of capitalism's commodities, are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls, all walls of China, all big, powerful walls. So money batters down communities, languages, forests, established ways of relating to other forms of life. It batters down the possibility of surviving outside money. So major feature of modern capitalism is the way in which millions and millions and millions of subsistence farmers throughout the world are forced by the monetization of food and of life. They are forced to leave their farms and move into the slums of the big cities. It is increasingly clear, and this is really I suppose the most important point, it is increasingly clear that the power of this progress, the power of this progress shaped by money, is now battering down the conditions necessary for human survival. We see it all around us, global warming, storms, all over the place, the massacre of biodiversity. No, we're all aware of that, especially if we watch something like that, this series. No, we're very conscious of the way that it is money progress, a progress shaped by money, by the rule of money, that is quite literally destroying the conditions of human survival. So if we think back to the Zapatistas, their life against money, I think, yeah, what they are actually saying is, yes, the continued existence of money as a social relation, as a way of relating to one another, is putting into danger, into extreme danger, the continuation of human life. No, way, this is obvious, was something that we all know, but it's very difficult to say. No, so that it's very difficult to. The power of the money taboo is such that it becomes difficult just to enunciate the most obvious and most fundamental point, the thing that money, the existence of money, is putting human life in danger. And you get more and more people, and wonderful, fighting against the destruction of the environment, fighting against fossil fuels, fighting against the destruction of biodiversity. But in each struggle, it becomes difficult to actually say, well, yes, but the basic problem is not fossils. The basic problem is not the loss of plants. The basic problem is the power of money in our society. I have, through my partner, I have contacts with the world of botanic gardening. In botanic gardens, you have these wonderful people who dedicate their lives to stopping the destruction of biodiversity. But of course, in the language of botanic gardens, they do not say, oh, the problem is capitalism, the problem is money, because simply it's something that's very difficult to express in that sort of struggle. So how do we express it? I mean, I think my own view, but maybe we'll come back to that later. I think more and more in terms of a politics of PS, of post-datum, the note that you put at the end of the letter. Yes, we can think of, this is necessary to preserve biodiversity, and that is necessary. And post-datum, PS, by the way, the real problem is the existence of money. Okay, third third point, I said I was going to go on for hours and hours, and I probably am. No? Third point, life against money. If we think of the horse, our harnessed horse, or our yoked two horses pulling the plow, they go up and down, up and down, up and down the field. And the harnessed humans, all of us probably, go to work in the morning, go to work in the morning, go to work in the morning. And the advance of, now I'm quoting from Marx and Capital, the advance of capitalist production developed the working class, which by education, tradition, habit, looks upon the conditions of the mode of production as self-evident laws of nature. The organization of the capitalist process of production, once fully developed, breaks down all resistance. The dull compulsion of economic relations completes the subjection of the laborer to the capitalist. Direct force outside economic conditions is, of course, still used, but only exceptionally. In the ordinary run of things, the laborer can be left to the natural laws of production, that is, to his dependence on capital, a dependence springing from and guaranteed in perpetuity by the conditions of production themselves. In other words, the rule of money is the rule of the dull compulsion of economic relations. So we're back with our madness. You know? If that is the case, then how on earth can we talk about life against money? And I think in that particular quote, Marx is right and Marx is wrong. I think wrong because, although I'm not sure about the rebellious thoughts of horses as they pull the plow, I am confident that rebellion against the rule of money is actually a characteristic of everyday life. You know, it expresses itself in dreams, it expresses itself in sabotage at work, it expresses itself in strikes, it expresses itself in illness, which may be real or just pretended. It expresses itself in mental breakdowns. It expresses itself in students doing PhDs or postdoctorates and think that they can escape from the rule of money for a couple of years. It expresses itself in projects that develop alternative ways of living free of money. It expresses itself in relations of love and friendship, where we say, here, money has no place. It expresses itself as well. I mean, because sometimes people say, well, there's no resistance. Going back to the title of the journey, they say, no, really, it's fine. Maybe 20 years ago, maybe when you were a child or when you were a student in 1968, maybe then there was resistance, but there's no resistance now. But resistance is shown, I think, both in active forms of struggle and also in the mirror image of police, in the mirror image of prisons, in the mirror image of armies, in the mirror image of schools, psychologists, a whole apparatus that seeks to contain us within certain limits, within certain assumptions, within certain forms of behavior. So life against money is actually inherent in the existence of money. But life overflows. No? Life, not just survival, not survival, the survival contained by the dull compulsion, but life that overflows, that is the overflowing of richness from the containment of the money form. The grayness that I mentioned at the beginning, the grayness with which the money fills the world, conceals a million struggles, passionate yearnings, desperate resistances, and rebellions. But the problem is that it is not enough. It is not enough because we are still in a society ruled by money, still in a world being destroyed by the rule of money. So how can we come out of it? How can we think through this madness of life against money? I think we're contained, obviously. Why, if we think of money as a containment, no, I think we are contained, of course, by violence and the fear of violence. That is obvious. No? There is repression everywhere. We are contained as well by what Marx calls the dull compulsion of economic relations. If we don't behave, fine. We don't want to sell our labor power. We can starve if we like, no? But if we think, no, this dull compulsion is very powerful. But then I suppose what I've been thinking is that this dull compulsion, in a way, it rests on a sort of contract, perhaps a social contract. Now, if you think of a horse going up and down the field, there is a kind of deal, isn't there? There's a kind of contract between the farmer and the horse. The horse says, fine, I'll go up and down, but you have to give me food and shelter at the end of the day. The wage contract is something like that. The worker goes to the factory or goes to the office or goes to the university and says, fine, I'll work. I'll do what I'm supposed to do. I'll give my classes. I'll turn the screw in the car that I'm building, what I'll think about the race, how artificial intelligence can be developed. I'll behave myself. But in return, you have to give me the means of living. No? So that there's a provided that, no, okay, fine. I'll take part in the destruction of the world, provided that you give me the money at the end of the day that allows me to, whatever, have enough food to eat, have somewhere to sleep, perhaps have a car, perhaps have a computer, perhaps go on holidays, be able to travel, whatever. People have different expectations. But at every level, there's this sort of trade-off, which is part of the wage contract, of course, the wage contract, but it actually extends further than that, isn't it? There's a kind of social contract, not a social contract in the liberal sense of something that's explicitly agreed by a homogeneous social population. But the social contract, in the same sense, we say, fine, you give us reasonable health service, you give us let us have smartphones, you give us conditions that make us confident that our children will have better conditions than we have had. And then we'll close our eyes. We'll close our eyes to inequality. We'll close our eyes to climate warming. We'll close our eyes to this destruction of communities by the opening of mines. We'll close our eyes to the genocide in Gaza, providing you can give us enough good conditions so that we can go home and have a nice cozy meal in the evening. So that there's the dull compulsion, the acceptance, I think, of the rule of money. It's not just by violence, and it's not just a question of ideology, but there is a material trade-off, a material deal, contract there, and constantly changing, that varies enormously for different groups of people in different times, but it is sufficient to keep our eyes closed, to keep our blinkers in place. No. It's been said, I'm not quite sure if this is true, but it convinced me anyway, it's been that the Chinese government accepts that it needs to maintain an annual growth rate of 6% to secure social stability. I don't know if that's right, but in any case, it does suggest very graphically this kind of sense of material trade-off on which the reproduction of the rule of money depends. If that is true, if we're okay so far, I'm on to now point 5. What if this social contract breaks down? And is it happening? I think if we think of the contract as having two sides, capital or money says to us, you keep your conduct and your expectations within certain limits, and we will give you what you need to reach those expectations. Okay. The problem, if we think then money as a form of containment, contains our activities, our dreams, our thoughts within certain structure. The problem with that, I don't know, from the point of view of money, is that capital goes tightening, money goes tightening those limits all the time, okay? So that money penetrates our lives now much more than 50, 60, 100 years ago. And also, exploitation of labor becomes more and more intense. Okay? Capital, in order to reproduce itself, has to intensify the process of exploitation all the time. That's what Marx talked about and is much discussed in terms of the tendency for the rate of profit to fall. What that really means is that we have to think of capitalism not just as a system of injustice, but as a social dynamic that is constantly pushing us, increasing the subordination of all human life and non-human life to its requirements. And on the other hand, okay, so the deal is, yes, we'll contain you. And what we say on our side is, well, fine, we'll forget all our critique of the obscene character of present society, as long as we receive our wage. No, as long as we have a sense of getting a little bit richer each year, as long as we have a sense of our children having a more secure future than we had, as long as we have a sense of some sort of social security, and what we've seen over the last 30, 40 years is that is no longer with it, that is coming into crisis. Wages have increased very little in the last 40 years in real terms in nearly all countries of the world. The state system of social support has declined. Our children may or may not, well, I'm thinking of grown-up children, okay, in my case, they may or may not earn more than we do, but they certainly don't have the conditions of security or well-being or good or housing or secure healthcare that we had, let's say, 30 years ago. So that there is a sense in which this social contract is coming into crisis. And it's coming into crisis not because of the rise, not because of ideology, not because of the rise of right-wing ideas, not because of the rise even of right-wing politicians. It's not because of Trump or Orban or Meloni or whoever. It's coming into crisis because the material basis of this social contract is in crisis. And the material basis is in social crisis because the whole structure of the social deal depends upon the successful exploitation of labor. The whole structure of this social contract that dominates society depends upon capital being able to appropriate a sufficient profit or social surplus value necessary to keep it going. And I think what has been happening in the last 40 years is that capital, in spite of appearances, in spite of the grotesque growth of inequality, that capital is having more and more difficulty in forcing people to produce the surplus value, the profit that is necessary. And that is why we get the enormous expansion over the last 40 years of debt, of indebtedness, of, in which the reproduction of capital is based not so much or not only on surplus value actually produced, but on the expectation that surplus value will be produced tomorrow, which is basically seems to be the basis of the enormous expansion of indebtedness in all the world over the last 40 years. So capitalism becomes more and more fictional in that sense, based and more fictional, and therefore also more and more volatile, more and more violent, more and more, but also more and more fragile. It is. Okay, where does that take us? I said I could talk about 40 minutes. I've been talking for more than that already, but I also said I'd go on for hours and hours, so I'm going to go on for a few more minutes. Where does that all take us? And it takes us into a situation, I think, of enormous social fragility and uncertainty. It takes us, I would say, not into a situation of our defeat, but actually into a situation where our strength, very often invisible, pushes the rule of money, the rule of capital, into a desperate struggle to survive. Okay. This desperate struggle to survive, I think, as I mentioned just now, for me, it has two sides to it. One is the expansion of debt. Now, in spite of the huge tightening of the money supply a couple of years ago, debt continues to expand. Capital cannot reproduce itself without this constant expansion of debt, and therefore dominance of capital in the form of money. Okay. It also produces increasing instability, increasing competition, and therefore increasing violence. In that situation, we have a growth of, it's very clear, a growth of social anger. And I think it's very important to distinguish between two forms of social anger. On the one hand, we have the social anger that is making the headlines all over the place, no? A kind of a highly identified, identitarian anger, which labels people, labels other people or others them. No, that person over there is in Portugal, therefore he is other, he's not us. No, he is in Barcelona, he's a foreigner. No, she is in Toronto, she's a foreigner as well. It's only the people in Mexico City who are real people, no, or whatever. No, but obviously that othering of people, that identifying of people, which means a dehumanizing of people, which people once dehumanized, we can kill them. We can send millions to the gas chambers, or we can just bomb and bomb and bomb and bomb them, as is happening in Gaza. No, they're not real people. So I think there is that horrible identification of anger, identification in the sense that the world then appears as a mass of identities, of labels. There is, on the other hand, the growth of, or the anger that the Zapatistas called la digna rabia, the dignified anger. No, it's not that we just want to not that we want to defend civilization against Trump or Orban or Millet. Not that, because what civilization is, as we know it, is the civilization of money. And the civilization of money is destroying its own basis and threatening to destroy the whole of humanity. So what we need is to say, yes, we are angry. We are angry against this capitalist system that exploits and destroys, but our anger is a dignified anger that tries to go to take off our blinkers, no, that tries to open our eyes, that tries to say, yes, now the struggle is the struggle of life against extinction, against the rule of money. And I suppose, I mean, sometimes it just seems hopeless. I mean, of course, we're on the side of life. Of course, we're against the baddies, but they seem so powerful at the moment. I think what that takes me at the moment in my thinking to an idea of a tipping point. Not that there's going to be a breakdown of capital because of its internal contradictions. Not that, because we are the internal contradiction of capital. And it's not the question of a future revolution, because that means an impossible switch from white to black or black to white, whatever, but rather a tipping point in terms of the only hope is an accumulation of the struggles of life against money, an accumulation where we grow and grow, a whole growing accumulation of resistances and rebellions, of yearnings and thinkings and strugglings and sharings, of commonings, a growing realization that the future of life is incompatible with the continuation of the rule of money. And if we think of that as what it is really, which is a pushing, a kind of heaving of this boulder, of this big rock up the hill, then what we want when we reach the top of the hill is not for the boulder to come rolling down again, like in the case of Sisyphus, but to be able to actually push it over the top of the hill where it becomes so obvious that life is incompatible with the rule of money. And part of that process of pushing up the hill, perhaps, is a multiplication of talks like this and praise of madness and praise of necessary madnesses. And thank you very much for being so patient.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for your talk. I was posting some of your saying. I think that we are the internal contradiction of capitalism was beautiful. I like it so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. We have been more or less 40 people online, but it's also true, John, that many times then people will watch our lectures later on. So Nuno told me that Laura Pulido, the first of our lectures, got so far 100 and Nuno, maybe 120.
187
Oh, sorry. Oh,
so far.
much more. 187. Very good. Okay. So I see that I think that we need a little bit of time because our streaming now, Nuno Lizzi is arriving a little bit later on YouTube. So I am also how do you say, eating, buying a little bit of time to give people the time to finish up John's question. But maybe I don't know if there is any question that we can already share with John, Noon or Litz.
Yes, thank you, John, personally, for your talk. I enjoyed it very much. So I'm going to share, there's a comment on YouTube by a person, Berta Flacker, if I say it correctly. So the point of the comment is in the question, is it falling down with the pension system breaking down? So I think the point is the pension system, yeah.
I think that's probably a very good example, actually. I hadn't thought specifically about the pension system, but I do think that if you look at the financial crisis of 2008, where in a way this accumulation of debt, more debt, more debt, came to a point of crisis, and which had tremendous effects for millions and millions of people throughout the world. If you look at what the bankers say in relation to that, they say, "Oh, we were struggling desperately to stop really a major a major financial explosion. In the end, they did it, but they did it by creating more and more and more debt. So there is a very strong sense of fragility, not just of financial fragility, but of social fragility. And of course, how that would hit people, it could well be in terms of the collapse or a worse collapse of the pension system. So, yeah.
Thank you, John. I see there is maybe another question, and I have also my own question. I don't know, while maybe Nuno and Lizzie, if you are monitoring a little bit, if there are more comments or question, I can also go with the question myself. And John, I have a question, a very practical one, not very theoretical. Sorry for this. But I was wondering if you want to say something about the concrete experiences going on, at the grassroots levels of going beyond money. I am thinking about some experiences of doing, somebody's speaking about like neighborhoods currency, alternative currency, or this kind of. I don't know if you are familiar with it. If you have been thinking about these experiences, I wonder if you want to say something about it.
Yeah, I think there are lots of experiences, as you say. I don't think if we think what it would mean to get rid of money, I don't think that can just be, oh, now we'll abolish money. I think that won't work. I mean, that was what Pol Pot tried to do in Cambodia with dreadful results. No, I think there are actually all sorts of things going on at the moment. Yes, experiments in alternative currencies, experiments as well in bartering, creation of a system of bartering that doesn't involve money. The most striking example of that I know of was in Argentina in 2001, 2002, where partly in response just to social necessity in the context of crisis, but also as a political project, there were something like 18 million people involved in the system of bartering. That's more than half the population of Argentina. No, enormously powerful. When things settled down again, then that was very much reduced. But yes, those things go on all the time. Also, I think if you say, let's abolish money, people will say, no, you're crazy. If you say, take it in particular areas, say, well, money, let's push money out of education. And people will say, yes, let's push money out of healthcare. Really, people's access to healthcare should not depend on money. Let's push money out of housing so that we think not just of increasing social housing, but perhaps universalizing social housing. Let's push money out of food. No, people should have a right of enough to eat. No? That's already very strong in things like water, campaigns around water. The idea, no, money should not affect people's access to water. And if you think of it in that way, then the madness evaporates a bit. Then yeah, of course. People will begin to say, yes, of course, let's think about that. Which I think does not mean, I'm not saying these should now be all controlled by the state, as in a kind of super welfare state, but let's take the whole development of education back into society. No? Let's think how we can do it collectively in different ways. No? Then it stops being mad, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. I've been seeing glimpses of on my screen. The kind of little bits of question appear and then disappear. So I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions. So I pass to Lizzie and Nuno, please.
Well, I can say something. Maybe I saw, Nuno, you just shared one questions that you took from YouTube, and I think it's very connected with the question of Marco. So maybe we can use this question to be the one Marco said. And it's from Dominique Shoini. Hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly the name. This person asked, thank you very much for your talk. I was wondering, what do you think about local currencies, which I think was similar to the Marco question, or few purpose currency against all purpose currency, loose harness, so a way out. If you can talk a bit about that. You already have done, but if you want to add something more about this.
Sorry, the sound went just for a moment.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I didn't hear it properly.
So this person is asking, what do you think about local currencies or few purposes currency against all purpose currency? Do you think it's a loose harness, a way out?
I would say, I think that it's a very interesting form of struggle. And I suppose my own feeling is that these forms of struggle have to be respected and they have to be tested. The danger about it is, of course, is that you may be simply introducing one way of measuring labor against another way of measuring labor. And I suppose I lean more towards the idea of commoning or communizing, in terms of thinking in terms of the sharing or what like the confluence of human activities as being something that is direct or collective rather than passing through any form of currency. On the other hand, I say that, and I also have to say I don't actually know enough about how local currencies are functioning to actually say anything very helpful.
Yes, so people are thanking you for your talk on YouTube. They are saying thank you very much, and a bunch of questions popping up. Two of them are more or less related. So one is, how do you imagine a tipping point and accumulation as opposed to the classic idea of revolution? And sorry, so and this connects with another one, which is what happens after Sisyphus reaches the top of madness? Is it the positive output of looking beyond money?
Yeah. Oh, very nice. No, I think that the traditional, the kind of 20th doesn't work, didn't work. No, I suppose I'm thinking or reading about people who dedicated their lives and died in revolutionary struggles. I have enormous admiration for them, but at the same time, we have to say that the outcome of those revolutions was often catastrophic. No, it was really, if one thinks of Russia, if one thinks of China, if one thinks even of Cuba, no. So I think we have to think of revolution in a very different. I mean, I think we cannot give up on the idea of revolution, because if we give up on the idea of revolution, then we are accepting this dynamic that seems to be taking us in the direction of extinction. No, we are accepting this enormously destructive dynamic of money. No, so we cannot give up on the notion of revolution. And over the last 20 years, of course, there has been a huge rethinking of what revolution means. I mean, the two great protagonists in that revolution, in that rethinking, are the Zapatistas. No, their whole, since 1994, an enormously creative thinking of what it could mean, no? focused on at the moment, they've been emphasizing the notion of the creation of the common a lot, but also about organizing on the basis of questions rather than on the basis of answers. So they don't say, this is the way, we'll show you how to do a revolution. They say, well, we don't know how to do a revolution. That's why we have to talk. And it is through asking that we advance. And the other great example, a great protagonist at the moment, is Rojava, obviously, where the Kurdish movement, I mean, I say Kurdish movement in inverted commas because it includes a lot of non-Kurdish people, are creating in the most appalling circumstances a society that is not, that is based on what they call democratic confederalism, that is not on a state-centered society, and where they're trying to develop different forms of economic and social relations. So there is that rethinking. About the tipping point, this is really only an idea. It's really an idea I think that I'm expressing for the first time today, that I've been thinking about for the last few weeks. I have two thoughts, I suppose, that are kind of fresh to me and perhaps ridiculous. The first is, which I mentioned briefly, is the idea of a PS politics or a PS revolutionary politics. In other words, in lots of all struggles, practically, struggles go on all the time, but they're always particular struggles focused on something in particular. We want to stop a big mining company destroying our village. We want to stop the building of a high-speed railway. We want to stop whatever. And often, in order to strengthen those struggles, it doesn't make much sense to talk in terms of revolution. And no, that's why I think that we have to think in terms, and I think that is what has been happening over the last 30 years, that you growth of particular struggles, but the idea of revolution or thinking beyond capitalism has become more marginalized. I think what we have to do is engage with practical struggles, practical struggles in the sense of, yes, changing the name of this journal from resilience to resistance, for example, is an important practical struggle. It's a step. And yes, by the way, this is just part of the struggle to create a different society. No? So partly that I'm into is kind of trying to think what this PS politics could mean. And the second, I think, related to that is to say, yes, there are all sorts of struggles going on at the moment. If you say money is destroying the world, a lot of people will say, yes, yeah, that's right. But what can we do about it? No? And I think that what we can do about it is not think, oh, it's a question of winning the next election, because it isn't. The states won't help us. All states necessarily promote the accumulation of capital. So the answer cannot lie through the state. Okay, but there are all sorts of struggles that perhaps, gather strength, or I suppose thinking in the opposite direction, maybe of going a stone going downwards, gathering moss and more moss and more moss and drying. But I suppose at the moment I'm thinking of pushing a boulder, or that we push 1 million boulders up the hill. Okay, and we're not yet there. We're not there yet, where people will say, yes, that's what my anger is about. My anger isn't about getting rid of the liberal politicians, corrupt politicians that we've known forever. My anger is about getting rid of a system. And once, maybe at some point, we can make that click, so that then conversation and thinking moves in a different direction.
Thank you for your answer very much. I think this last part of your answer actually is connected with another question we got, which was very connected with a question I had for you. And the question is also about, it's from Berta Flacker, and who is telling that is concerned about the increasing violence and what will this increasing violence mean, especially for women worldwide. We know that violence against women has only increased since the start of capitalism and current paid work, all of that. And I build on that, telling that I really appreciate how you were talking about the anger, connecting the anger with capitalism and all the centrality of money. And you were talking about different social anger. On a side, the dignified one, and the one, the identitarian anger. So doing this connection, I think, was useful to also recognize the different nuance of anger. So that was a bit the question, and I have to say I added my comment together with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the starting point is anger. The starting point, I mean, we see all these horrible political developments at the moment. We recognize the anger. I mean, I suppose for me, thinking of the riots and the anti-migrant riots in Britain just, 2 months ago, and you look at the pictures of the people rioting against migrants, and you think, well, that's not me, no. And your first reaction is you want to say, well, no, be reasonable. But I feel that that's the wrong reaction. That no, it's not a question of being reasonable. It's a question of being saying, yes, we are angry. That's why we're here today. I mean, we're all the four of us, but presumably also all the people who are connected. In some way, we have an anger that shapes our choices in life. We have an anger against the system that is so obviously destructive, so obviously unjust, so obviously horrible in many, many ways. So we are not kind of sitting back being reasonable. We want to express our anger, but we want to express our anger in a different way. We want to express our anger in a way that doesn't label people or doesn't label um, things, I suppose, but especially doesn't label people. And we want to say, no, our anger goes beyond that. It is an anger that tries to emancipate human dignity in a society that is based on the negation of that dignity. No? So, I mean, I talked about PS and the tipping point, but the other thing I've been trying to think about a lot is the question of anti-identitarian politics, or a politics that moves in against and beyond identities. No? In other words, that we think, no, that we try and understand, I suppose, our own social existence, that we're not just individuals, we're not Mexicans or Italians or Irish or Portuguese or whatever. We are actually, okay, we have a sense of that identity, but we have to go against and beyond it and say, no, it's much more than that. We are actually fighting now for the survival of humanity. The example that always brings to my mind again is the Zapatistas, wonderful, wonderful Zapatistas, who say, well, yes, we are indigenous, we're an indigenous movement, but we are not an indigenous movement. We are a movement for humanity. We are trying to get rid of capitalism and create a society based on human dignity. The same, the Kurdish movement, which is, no, we're not just a Kurdish for the Kurds. We're actually trying to create a different society that integrates all sorts of people. No? So we have to think, yes, our starting point is anger, but that anger that turns against identifying, that turns against labeling. No? Whereas the anger expressed by people like Trump or Millet or whoever else, no, are very much labeled. They have at their center a process of labeling Mexicans as criminals, labeling women as being inferior, no, labeling gays as being unworthy of humanity, I suppose, whatever. Yeah, so that's.
Thank you. Thank you, John. We are almost over because it's now almost half past, but maybe we can take just 5 minutes, no more than that, because there are two questions that I would like to bring to you. One is from Maximilian Risker. Sorry, Maximilian. So I am so sorry. I am more or less killing your last name. So Maximilian is asking, speaking about the impossibility of changing this enormous exploitation and so much more. What do you think about Eric Bright's approach of disrupting capitalism within its own boundaries? And then a difficult question, I put these two together, John, and we try to answer in 5 minutes. Lorenzo Bertoncini, how can you push money out of, let's say, housing alone if construction workers still have to purchase bread at the end of their day? Lorenzo is posing a complicated question. So Maximilian and Lorenzo, and then we will stop.
Yeah, I think with in relation to Eric Olin Wright's approach, I think for me the key preposition, if you like, is the word in, against, and beyond. Okay, in, hyphen, against, hyphen, and, hyphen, beyond, one word. In other words, we have to accept that, yes, we live in capitalism. The way we think, the way we live is shaped by capitalism. But also, the very fact that we live in capitalism, which is an aggressive system, which pushes us into certain forms of behavior that we may not like, means that we are also against, whether we like it or not. We are born into an antagonistic society. So we are in and against, and also we have dreams of going beyond. So we are in, against, and beyond, and that we should think of political action or struggle or social struggle or action of any sort in terms of this movement of in, against, and beyond, in which it is absolutely crucial to keep the three parts together. Because if you separate them, then you get either into a very limited reformist in politics or an abstract revolutionary against politics or a utopian beyond politics. We have to hold them together in some way. And on the question of the housing and the construction workers, yeah, I think there are all sorts of, obviously, an awful lot of practical questions that would need to be involved. The idea of housing for everybody, I think, is a fairly easy concept to grasp, that you separate the securing of adequate housing for everybody in society. You separate that from the amount of money that people have. Okay, that doesn't mean, that would actually open, and if you think of construction workers, that would open up more scope. Plenty of construction would be needed. Presumably plenty of very imaginative construction would be needed. In the initial stage, it would not be a question of saying, oh, no, you won't. Of course, they would have to be rewarded for what they did do. Yeah, I mean, there, I don't think there's a problem at all.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you very much to, of course, Lizzie and Nuno for sharing with me this session. And well, many thanks to all of you who have been with us today for all these fantastic questions. And of course, some of them we couldn't address now, but I hope that in a way the entire discussion was a way to address those questions. And the whole point is keep asking ourselves questions about how to change the world, how to be on the right side, which is maybe the left actually side, in this struggle between life versus capital, life versus money. So thank you again, John. It was such a pleasure and honor to have you with us today. And please join us on the 19th of November with Dina Gilo.
Before that,
yes, John, please.
Can I just say as well, thank you. Thank you very much, Marco, for the invitation and the organization. Thank you very much, Nuno. Thank you very much, Litsi. And thank you to everybody else and the people I can't see. Thanks a lot.
Indeed. Very good. See you around on the 19th, and please feel free to share the video and this fantastic lecture. See you soon. Life versus money. Ciao.
Ciao, bye. Thank you, John.
Bye, John. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.